Movie tie-in games. We've all seen them, most of us have played at least one of them at some point, and we're all in agreement that they're mostly all pretty awful, right? Well, to sum it all up super quickly, the movie tie-in game dates back all the way to 1979 when Star Trek Phaser Striker released for the Microvision. The 80s seen more and more of these games released for any and every big blockbuster you can think of. A lot of these just boiling down to 2D shoot 'em ups or platformers vaguely following the plot of the film and using the characters' likenesses. The trend carried on well into the 90s and early 2000s, which in all fairness does make a little bit more sense, since the increase in technology was able to more accurately recreate the characters on locations from the original film. For the most part. Since I grew up mainly in the early 2000s, this is when I really started to notice the insane amount of games being released next to their feature-length counterparts. For context, there were about 245 games based on movies released between 2000 and the end of 2010, for only 66 since then, with just 7 of them coming in the last 5 years, and that's including LEGO games. At one point in time, you couldn't go to see a film in the cinema without then seeing, and possibly begging your parents for, the inevitable PS2 game to go with it. So why the drop off in the last decade? With the games mainly being used as a tool to cross-promote and drum up interest in the film to sell tickets, the increase in streaming platforms and social media marketing mean the costly process of half-arsing a game for advertising loses its appeal. Plus, I think it's safe to say we've just reached a point where a game can stand up against the big budget blockbusters, and in most cases tell a way more interesting story with better character development and world building, leaving no real reason for the two to coexist today. But are the studios missing a trick, not releasing a game alongside their 2-hour adventure anymore? Well, that's what I'm going to take a look at today. Wish me luck. Okay, so honestly, I really liked this one when I was young. A mysterious plot, twisted but quirky visuals, a table-eating baby, and Jim Carrey. I mean, what's not to like? Releasing in late 2004, 12-year-old me thought it was a darker, edgier, more mature film. And since I was in those pivotal years just before my metamorphosis into a teenager, it really interested me. Don't get me wrong, I was still banging out 12 episodes of Rugrats all grown up every weekend too, but this was just my entry point to more serious topics and darker subject matters. I think Harry Potter did this for a lot of kids around the same time too. This shit is pretty freaky when you're 12, okay? In short, the books, film, game, and Netflix series, because why wouldn't there be a Netflix series, follow 3 siblings who lose their parents in a mysterious house fire, forcing them to stay with a distant family member, Count Olaf, at his home. Unfortunately for them, it turns out he's not the lovable fun uncle you might assume he is at first glance, but is indeed after their family's fortune, unravelling into a series of, well, unfortunate events. Obviously. I've never played the game or even heard about it before, to be honest with you, so I was interested to see if they could pull off recreating the general look and feel of the film, and if it could tell a story I would have found equally as interesting at the time.
Hello, hello, hello. I am your beloved Count Olaf.
So opening to a quick cutscene that introduces us to the Baudelaire children and a brief backstory touching on each of their personalities. Inventing, learning, and biting shit. We're then introduced to 2004 video game Jim Carrey, who has just found out he doesn't get full guardianship until Thursday, so we're dumped into our room, leaving us to invent our way out of this bleak and unfortunate situation. The gameplay mainly consists of finding certain objects around the house, allowing Violet to piece together a weapon or object needed to advance through each section. She's scared of rats, so invents the brilliant bopper so Klaus can clear them out, then he's scared of spiders, so Violet does the same with the fruit flinger. This loop is broken up a little bit with Sunny's 2D platforming sections, some occasional mini-games, and a few boss battles. To be honest, I like it. It fits well with what the kids do in the film, so it makes sense in terms of plot, and it's interesting to see what goofy thing we'll get our hands on next, or what situations Sunny's older and supposedly more responsible siblings will endanger her with next. I'm sorry, but for clever kids, you think they would know that this is not okay to put a baby through. In general, the visuals are, well, 2004 GameCube visuals. But the characters are recognisable, the environments fit the dark, gothic, spiky weirdness we would expect, and there's some nice colourful sections to switch it up occasionally. At first, I really didn't think the original A-listers were back to reprise their roles, but it turns out they are. I'm just not sure why Jim Carrey sounds like Jim Carrey doing a Jim Carrey impression.
My theatre troupe will be dining here this evening, and you will have dinner ready precisely when we feel like eating it.
So before we go any further, I need to mention that if you've never seen the film before, this game isn't really going to try and fill you in on a massive amount of the plot. There are a few cutscenes to take you between each level, which in this game are basically each of the Guardians' houses that you stay at. But there isn't enough there for you to really understand what's happening without seeing the film first. So, just so you know where we're at, Olaf is a nasty dude obsessed with getting his hands on the large fortune inherited by the 3 children after their parents perished in the house fire. He's willing to do whatever it takes, which sure means by dressing up and disguising himself.
I am Stefano. I am an Italian man.
Trying to get close to each of our Guardians before just killing them. Getting back to the gameplay in the first level, we continue making our way through Olaf's house, taking out a few of his goons and eventually collecting the ingredients needed to prepare dinner. But of course, Olaf isn't happy with our offering of some lovely homemade pasta and throws it back in our faces, demanding roast beef.
Where's the roast beef?
After taking out 3 generations of rats, sludging through toxic waste and violating every child endangerment law imaginable, this turd rejecting our meal finally pushes us over the edge and we plan our grand escape. Not going as well as we would have wanted though, the children are caught, getting whisked away in Olaf's car, only to get stuck on some train tracks. Luckily, Violet puts together a quick invention to hit the track switcher and saves us all from being squished. This is a running theme within the game, but Mr. Poe, the man responsible for finding the children's suitable guardian, just randomly turns up. There's a point later in the game where he just happens to be in the middle of a large lake with us. It's pretty creepy. But for now, he's taking us to Dr. Montgomery's, a brilliant herpetologist with a lifelong interest in reptiles and snakes, homing them in his very own reptile room. Apparently, the perfect place to raise 3 children. Monty plans to take us to Peru for an expedition, wanting us to prove we're up to the task by completing various challenges and collecting adventure awards. This opens the game up a little here, allowing us to explore the grounds with a few platforming sections taking advantage of Klaus's new moon boots, along with some light combat, mainly consisting of slaughtering exploding bees. Side note, but I actually have no idea how to efficiently deal with these bees. I just end up standing in place and smashing the B button as fast as humanly possible. I mean, if it works though. We finish collecting the rest of our rewards, and then scoop up a bunch of snakes Monty wants inside before us leaving. This section has us making our way through a maze, switching between Klaus and Violet, each opening doors for the other to progress. It's a fun enough section, if a little too easy. Unfortunately, during this time, Olaf has disguised himself in a bald cap and an accent, posing as Monty's new assistant, Stefano.
Good morning. I am Stefano, Dr. Montgomery's new assistant.
This allows him to get close enough to kill Monty and pinning on the incredibly deadly Viper. But anyone who knows the incredibly deadly Viper knows that the incredibly deadly Viper is one of the friendliest creatures in the entire animal kingdom. Sonny proves this to Mr. Poe, who once again is just here now, out of fucking nowhere, and he takes us to our final guardian of the game, Aunt Josephine. At first, this area is much of the same, collecting some hurricane supplies we need before taking on 2 mini-bosses. This dude smacking an anchor about, and then our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ pelting us with an endless supply of soggy bread rolls. To get the last object we need, we invent the Peppermint Popper, which leads us into an admittedly super fun House of the Dead style on-rails first-person shooter. Honestly, this was the most fun section of the game for me. After that, it's back to Aunt Josephine's, and oh shit, she's dead. Flinging herself from existence from her bay window. God, this game does get pretty dark considering the target audience age at the time. Before we get too bummed about the loss of our new aunt though, we managed to decipher a secret message left in her note. Turns out she's hiding out in a nearby cave. This then leads us into the only section of the game I found at all frustrating. We need to get through a platforming section to get out of the house that is currently being engulfed by the hurricane. It's just the combination of the wind physics, the rain affecting our vision, and of course falling through solid floor, did lead to a few deaths. It's not that bad, and in all seriousness, nothing worth complaining about usually, but just due to how easy the rest of the game is, it stuck out. After all the children have made their way through the house, we need a way to get to the cave. So bear in mind, Klaus has never sailed a boat before, but of course has read about it. So the Baudelaires decide to sail a boat, on their own, with a baby, in the middle of a hurricane. Sure, why not? So the next section has us rescuing Josephine from the cave, only to have our boat overrun with flesh-eating leeches. Luckily, a friendly fisherman is on site to rescue us. But of course, it turns out to be Olaf, taking the children aboard and pushing our beloved aunt to a lychee death. Grim. The next cutscene leads us into the last section of the game. Mr. Poe is here because of course he is, and due to Olaf's bravery and selflessness, decides he's perfect guardian material. Olaf is informed though that even if the children do meet their untimely demise, he wouldn't be entitled to the family fortune.
The law clearly states that you would not inherit the Baudelaire fortune if anything happened to the children. That only applies to close relatives and married couples.
So, as any sane person would, Olaf decides he's going to marry Violet, a 14-year-old girl. Yeah, let's just skip past that real quick. The last level has us playing as Klaus, tasked with escaping the tower we've been locked in, stopping the wedding from taking place that Olaf has disguised as a simple play, and then rescuing Sunny, the caged baby now dangling from the roof being used as leverage for the wedding to go ahead. We make our way to the top of the tower using our newly invented and not as fun as you think it would be grappling hook. Some simple stealth sections, some platforming avoiding barrels, and ending up at our last boss battle of the game. It's an easy fight, it's just long. It has us avoiding barrels being thrown at us before getting to land a hit. I just wish they had made this a little bit more engaging, say 3 rounds with each getting increasingly challenging, more barrels being thrown, and maybe some enemies we need to clear out before progressing. Instead, it's just 5 rounds of the same thing. After we do manage to finish off Donkey Kong Jr. over here, we make our way over to a window, looking down on the scene of Olaf marrying a child. Again, let's just skip over that. We then use the window to burn the marriage certificate and Olaf like the auntie is. As soon as the certificate is eradicated, that's curtains. Our final cutscene of the game letting us know that Olaf is swiftly imprisoned, putting the children in the hands of our lovely neighbourhood judge, Justice Strauss, and we all live happily ever after. Except, nope, that's not what happens. Olaf makes his escape before being detained, vowing to do whatever it takes to get his grabby hands on the children and their family fortune.
I'll get my hands on your fortune if it's the last thing I do.
We were promised that this game wouldn't have a happy ending, and I think they managed to deliver on that at least. Although very short and too easy, it still would have been great to see how much further they could have gone with the different gameplay styles introduced here. All things considered, we started off pretty strong, but since the game was kinda drab, filled with weird people and rats, let's move on to something a little bit lighter, filled with weird people and, rats. Ratatouille, hands down the best Pixar movie ever made. Fact, no arguments. Except maybe Toy Story.
Hell yeah.
I'm not going into detail on this one, I mean everyone's seen it, right? And if you haven't, just go and watch it. It's adorable. The game is a 3D platformer collectathon, breaking each area up into a few main missions and some mini games. We start off in the rat's place of residence, an old lady's garden somewhere in France. This serving as your tutorial level to teach us the basic moveset and introduce us to the game's mechanics. Just to get straight to the point here, one of the first things you're going to notice as soon as you take control of Remy is just how frustrating certain aspects of controlling him actually are. General getting from point A to point B is functional enough for a 2007 kids movie tie-in game, but there's a few things you need to nail in a platformer that just fall way too short here. For starters, the double jump they provide you with is super awkward to use. In most other games, you'll use your first jump, and then just as you start losing height, you'll hit your second jump to get some extra height and distance. But here, Remy just does a flip in the air which doesn't actually give you any extra height and only a small amount of extra distance, leading to a lot of this, and this, and this. The most confusing part about it is, I tried out the GameCube version just to see if it was any different. It turns out it's way different, but they handled the jumping so much better in that version, so it's weird they would change it for the jump to the next gen. Another mechanic we're introduced to is pillar jumping. Is that what you call it? Jumping from a small pillar to another, using a button in between jumps to land on the next object. If you've played a Sly Cooper game before, you know exactly what this is. Remy uses this mechanic to jump between small points you couldn't normally land on and to walk on ropes. The issue is, you have absolutely no indication that it's worked, leaving you just mashing the button hoping it's registered. Again, to go back to Sly Cooper, actually no, let's just go to another movie tie-in game so no one can say it's an unfair comparison. In Toy Story 3, your character will spin in the air to let you know that it's registered your input, and you're definitely going to land where you need to. Yet again, even more confusingly, this is handled perfectly in the GameCube version. Why would you remove that? I know I'm banging on a lot about two relatively small nitpicks in a game that I shouldn't really be expecting too much from, but these things just keep adding up throughout your playthrough and ultimately lead to a pretty bad experience. The most important thing in most games that we play, especially a 3D platformer, is control, and I just feel like I'm never reliably in control of Remy. It doesn't matter how good your level design, your visuals, or your soundtrack are, if the fundamentals of controlling your character are frustrating. Unfortunately, it doesn't really hit on many of the other points either. The constantly repeated lines from Chef Gusto every 2 seconds,
Perhaps if you find the handle to the gramophone, Salim can get it to work.
or lines being triggered over the top of each other.
The nearest I know you are hungry, Remy, but can you help that chef make a soup?
Sounds like a plan.
The repetitive sound effects around the environment, the audio levels being way too loud for random sounds for no reason. You can just tell there's no real effort or care here. It's just lazily rushed out alongside the movie. It just feels cheap. So after the tutorial level, we make our way to the second area of the game. The first thing we see is a minigame. May as well give it a go. We follow Chef Gusto around an area of the level and complete some simple platforming. Once completed, the next thing we see is another mission marker, so naturally that's where we go next. We have to help Linguini by either collecting for or knocking ingredients into a soup. This entire mission is pretty awkward and frustrating, due to a cramped space and the rigid camera not allowing us to see much of what we're trying to do, and constantly getting us spotted by Linguini, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. When we do manage to finish the mission, it seems like this area is done. It takes us straight to a small cutscene in the next location. At first, I thought I'd been completely locked out of this area, missing out on the other minigames and exploration. It turns out that's not the case, and maybe Chef Gusto did explain this at some point, but due to just how f***ing annoying he is constantly, I ended up never paying attention to what he was saying. This feeling of not really knowing where you're going or what you're going to be doing next runs throughout the game. Well, the parts I did manage to get through at least. I tried my best to see this game through to the end, but I just really couldn't. I'm not gonna lie, I really don't like this game. It turns out each level is more of a small hub world leading to different main missions and minigames. As an example, this minigame has you running on a wheel collecting 20 stars before the time runs out. But the only way I can describe how this part feels to play is like playing Micro Machines without using your thumbs. Rather than controlling Remy, it's like you're controlling his momentum, which on a flat surface would give you just enough control to have some idea where you'd end up. But on this turning, rounded surface with boxes to jump on and very little depth perception, it leads you to basically just retrying until you're lucky enough to accidentally run into the 20 stars you need. Look, I really wanted to like this game. I absolutely love the film, and the idea of platforming around France as an adorable rat, collecting and playing your way through some cooking minigames, in theory sounds awesome. But the lack of control, the frustrating platforming mechanics, how cheap and lazy everything feels, and Chef fucking Gusto unfortunately create a rotten experience. My main advice would be, if you're absolutely desperate to try it out for yourself, stick to the GameCube, PS2, or any of the other 44 versions of this game they made instead of this one. I may continue through the GameCube version in my own time, but I think for the sake of this video and my decreasing sense of sanity, we'll just move on to our next game. I'm really hoping this will be able to redeem the opinion I now have of 4-board platformers. More of a beat 'em up than a platformer, but you know what I'm saying. I did rewatch the film for this video just before playing the game, and I gotta say, I forgot that it's actually pretty f***ed up when you think about it. If you haven't seen it, the film released in 2009 following a girl Penny and her partner in crime fighting, Bolt, this super-powered beast of a canine on a mission to save her dad from the evil clutches of Dr. Calico. Well, at least when they're on set. See, Bolt and Penny star in their own series of spy action TV shows. But this is the f***ed up part I was talking about. They never let Bolt leave the set, meaning he permanently thinks he's an amped up, world-saving supermutt, and his owner, the person he loves most in the world, is forever being kidnapped by bad guys and at constant risk of some supervillain revenge arc at any moment. The rest of the film is the expected 96 minutes of heartwarming Disney adventuring, but it's an enjoyable watch. Getting to play as a dog with superpowers through this spy action TV show definitely has its appeal, so I was eager to check this one out. The game exists in the world of the TV show in the film, and not in the film we see about the TV show, but not the actual film we watch. Does that make sense? You'll split your time between Penny with more stealth, puzzling and light platforming sections, and Bolt with his beat 'em up levels, getting to use all the same powers and abilities his on-screen persona is capable of. The opening level gets you in the mood for some sleuthing, using your wheelbar to traverse the level and sneakily taking out some guards, also introducing you to some gas bombs and invisibility cloak. Fancy. The controls are really simple, stripping you of camera control and making what would be trickier platforming sections the dreaded QuickTime event. But it does work fine for the level design and for what would have been the target audience at the time. We make our way through the rest of this introductory level and get to take control of Bolt, button mashing our way through a room full of evildoers. So again, the combat here is incredibly simple, using the one button for your basic attack which you can chain together into combos, and another button to grab an enemy after landing enough hits to stun them, then using a direction to throw or slam the enemy. We have access to a ground pound move straight away, and progressing through the game unlocks different moves like the super bark and the laser eyes. Just to go back to the stripped down combat for a second, it isn't inherently a bad thing to have simple combat, but the enemies here just take so many damn hits to put away. This draws out every single encounter you have, with more enemies seeming to turn up endlessly, each taking way too long to finish off. This means what could be super quick combo based satisfying combat becomes tedious button bashing. Even the power-ups you get within the next few levels don't do anything to deepen the combat at all, since you mainly use your unlocked abilities to stun the enemy, to then just do more one-button basic combos. So after pressing square more times than Kingdom Hearts, we eventually get to fight a helicopter to finish off this level. Okay, come on, this is exciting. Turns out this is just running back and forth before another QuickTime event. Okay, don't worry. Maybe they were just getting us through the first level, easing us into the controls, so now level 2 is really going to open up and give us something. Ah, here we go. Exploring a foreign land as Bolt, infiltrating an enemy base, and this is the entire game, isn't it? At this point, I had to switch to playing the PC version due to the 12 frames a second I was getting from the PS3 release. But despite the improvement in frames, it's just more waves of enemies that take way too long to kill. You do get short sections of Penny's slow platforming puzzle solving to break up some of the tedium, but then it's straight back to exactly the same thing, over and over and over. For the 90ish minutes I tried before having to give up, there's just no depth here, no engagement or payoff to the grind. Yes, I know it's a game made 14 years ago for kids who enjoyed a film about a cute dog with superpowers, and I'm a 28-year-old bitching about it on the internet. But I think even if I was playing this back in 2008 as the little tween I was, it would still be just as boring as it is today. This isn't about system limitations and the normal jank associated with older games. It released on the PS3, so those excuses wouldn't really be valid anyway. It's just boring game design pushed out in a rush to capitalize on young fans of the film, or their parents who just recognize the puppy on the cover. Ultimately, Bolt just feels like playing My Name is Mayo, but at least that had a grubby platinum trophy for my efforts. I think the best way to sum it up for you is with this absolutely incredible review. How can I even begin to start a review on Bolt? Bolt is a timeless masterpiece that not even God himself can compare to. Gets old after a few hours. Okay, so I feel like we're heading downhill pretty fast here, so I took a different approach for this one. Instead of jumping in blindly to my inevitable disappointment, I've taken a look at some gameplay to see if anything stood out as interesting. And although I never did watch the film when it released, I do have this weird fever dream-like memory of it. But the game looked like it had some potential as what I can only describe as my first Ratchet & Clank.
Playtime is slaytime.
I watched the film a few days ago and it's fine. Just your typical small-town robot wanting to help his friends and family with his inventions, only to stumble onto the big evil corporation's plot to make money by screwing robots over, meaning it's down to our small-town hero to stop it. No doubt I would have liked it a little bit more at the time, but now it's just okay, if a tad forgettable. Also with way too many creepy puns about our hero's robo-junk.
But it's okay. Making the baby's the fun part.
The game is exactly what I thought it would be when looking at some gameplay. A more basic, stripped down Ratchet & Clank, with a little added clunk. Clunk as in a dodgy camera, and not this. It's basically Robots and Clank. You take control of... Wait, what was his name again? Oh yeah, Rodney Copperbottom. Platforming and shooting your way through linear stages to collect the blueprints needed to upgrade your weapons and abilities. Wait, wasn't the film about the exact opposite of this? Fighting back against upgrades because we're all perfect just how we are? Little bit of mixed messaging going on here, Eurocom. There's also way more robot and robot genocide in this game than they showed in the film. It paints a very different picture of our boy Rodney. So yeah, we do have access to weapons in this game, meaning we have combat among the platforming and occasional ball rolling stages and races. Well, race. The combat is very stripped down and basically just consists of auto-aiming at the nearest enemy while pressing a fire button. We collect scrap around the environment that act as our ammo, and if you do find yourself scrapless, Rodney has a wrench we can use as a weaker but permanent melee attack. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. We do have an option to enter a first person mode and manually aim, which is a nice inclusion, but due to the aged controls, using this is very clunky purely for shooting. The issue being the reticle doesn't stop moving when you let go of the stick. It kinda just eases to a stop, which means any precise aiming really is impossible. It's also crazy sensitive with no option available to adjust it, so I never relied on it for actual combat unless the enemy was unable to hit us, giving us the extra time needed to wrestle with the aiming. Where the first person view did come in super handy though is just for general looking around the environment, searching for the blueprint parts you need to collect, or planning out your route for platforming. Since the camera is, as I said, a little clunky, the ability to look around more precisely at any point is helpful for tighter sections and trickier platforming. The camera isn't flat out broken or game breaking, it's just a product of its time and struggles to move freely around some of the levels, especially any with indoor areas. The only thing that did annoy me about the camera is the amount of enemies that will hit you off screen, due to the limited control you have to freely move the camera around. The only thing stopping this becoming super frustrating is just due to the game being pretty easy throughout, meaning the issue doesn't really ever lead to you dying, unless you were really having a hard time leading up to these moments, I guess. There is one other situation where the issue I have with the camera becomes super apparent, but as that's towards the end of the game, I'll go into it a little bit more later. So we head through our first area getting to grips with the controls, collecting different blueprints we need around the level to progress, and for the next 3-ish hours, that's literally the entire game. We go to a new area, meet a character who needs us to collect some random parts for us to progress to a new area, to meet a new character who needs us to collect some random parts for us to progress to the new area. On paper, it's incredibly boring, but in practice, well, yeah, it is kind of boring, but the new areas are varied enough with different platforming sections to keep it just about interesting enough for most of the game. I do really wish they had mixed up some of the objectives a little bit, because other than one ball rolling race, the rest of the game up until the very end is literally the same thing. At this point though, I'm really trying to keep my expectations of these games in check. We're not talking about bolt levels or repetitive, but it is difficult to get excited about progression when you've already seen the entire gameplay loop in the first 5 minutes. There's also no real reward for your progression through story either, as you get a really disjointed plot delivered via a few clips from the film acting as our cutscenes. Even if you have seen the film, the clips don't really make sense in terms of the film's plot. You just kinda get given a random clip with the same characters in the same area you're currently playing through, despite when or why it happened in the film. So obviously there's not a whole lot else to talk about throughout most of the rest of the game, so I'm just going to skip to the arse end of it because this is where things go from a little boring to frustratingly repetitive. So first up we get a ball rolling stage needing us to collect 50 parts to, well, I can't actually remember why we need them, we just do. The ball rolling works fine and controls okay, but the level just takes way too long to get through. It really feels like they were on a strict deadline to bang this game out, so just had no time to truly flesh out any of the ideas that they actually had. There are elements of effort throughout the game. The visuals are pretty good for the most part, and they've obviously spent time making sure the character models were as close as they could be to the actual film. There's a few other nice touches, like being able to talk to random characters in the environment who deliver a few different voice acted lines.
My boyfriend said he got home late last night because he was being chased by a sweeper. Some excuse.
It serves absolutely no purpose, but it does help to flesh the world out a little bit. But then with the core gameplay and mission structure, it just seems like they really didn't know how to adapt the film into interesting missions. This becomes even more obvious during the last area. We make our way through a series of different platforming challenges, and here is the biggest offender of the camera clunk I was talking about. We have these monkey bar sections over instant death lava pits, needing to line ourselves up over a platform before dropping down. But we're completely unable to move the camera freely to see where we're going to land, so it's literally just guesswork. It's also in this area that you can clearly tell they're trying to desperately stretch this game out to the 4-hour mark. After making our way through these different platforming sections, we have to make our way up to the top of this spinning shafty thing, slowly waiting for it to rotate so we can use the air vent to progress to the next level, to then very slowly rotate to the next air vent and so on. 6 times. When we do eventually make our way to the top, we're told we actually need to head back down and collect 10 golden bolts for the guard to look the other way and let us through. Doing so gives us a few more platforming challenges before then having to head straight back up the shaft. This serves absolutely no purpose, and the entire climb is only there to lengthen the game. In all fairness, I am making it sound a little bit worse now as I'm just focusing on certain aspects of the game, but it is just pretty boring. It's not frustrating to play like Ratatouille or brain-numbingly repetitive like Bolt, and there is some good ideas here and a little potential for a good game. And I know it's ironic to repeat myself when trying to say the game is repetitive, but it really does just feel like they didn't have enough time to finish the game, so just had to artificially lengthen areas instead of deepening the gameplay to justify the price tag. The only other gameplay we get is in the form of this short section of rolling on Big World, which for some reason controls worse than the actual ball rolling, and then 2 boss fights. Neither are really that interesting though. The first has us activating these sludge cannons to chip away at the enemy's health, which never really felt like I was doing it on purpose, just randomly hitting the ones I think may manage to hit him. Then our final boss is of course Ratchet, sticking us into our first person aim, oversensitive controls and all, and then just spam shooting a bunch of robots before landing a few on the big bad himself. If I was a fan of the film at its release, I'm sure this game would have served as an okay few hours. Nowadays though, there's just no real reason to revisit this one. Missed potential seems to be a little bit of a running theme with these games, and I unfortunately think it just comes down to the studios not giving a big enough budget or a long enough development process to create something really good, relying more so on a quick cash grab and a little cross promotion for movie sales. I'm still holding out hope I'm going to be proved wrong about some of these games, and what a better way to try and do that than with one of the most popular and beloved animated franchises of all time. I remember playing a little bit of this when I was young, and I'm pretty sure it's actually kinda dope. I was a massive fan of the films growing up and even had my fair share of the toys, with them taking pride and place on top of one of my shelves, being very closely monitored for any signs of activity. I swear down Woody moved a few times, but yeah, in hindsight, that was just my dad fucking with me. But a boy can dream. So the game had a few different versions like a lot of movie tie-ins and released across multiple platforms. I did start playing the PC version, but I had a lot of issues with stuttering which turned out to be super annoying. And then when I took a look online, it seems like the Steam release is slightly stripped down when compared to the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 versions anyway. So we're just going to stick with the PS3 version in its fully intended glory. Pressing start from our very simple title screen throws us into a quick cutscene and straight into our first level, chasing after a runaway train on our trusty steed Bullseye, taking out some aliens, saving a few orphans and then stopping the evil Dr. Porkchop. As you do. It's a great opening. It sets the pace nicely, throwing you straight into the action with the train chase and then giving you full control of Woody, walking you through the simple moveset. We have our usual double jump, shoulder charge for bashing our way through barriers, and then using the right trigger will throw a ball at the nearest enemy, while holding the left trigger will enter us into aiming mode. It's all straightforward enough, but it feels good to use. The tutorial showing you a ghost character performing the moves are a little bit annoying as they just take a bit too long and you can't skip them. The controls are straightforward enough, so I don't really think it was necessary, but there's not a massive amount of them so it doesn't become too tedious. The visuals are really nice throughout this level. Well, through the whole game to be honest. Fit in really nicely with the look established in the films, and the cutscenes even look like they were pulled directly from them. Yeah, a little lower resolution, but colour me impressed. No janky game models in sight. We do have some of the cast returning to voice their plastic counterparts, and the replacements in the game do a brilliant job of recreating the voices, including Tom Hanks' brother Jim, acting as our Woody.
Rex, you were supposed to get the phone and come right back.
The music in general is also fantastic, with a mix of classics like You've Got a Friend in Me playing throughout our menus, and then a mix of thematic movie scores set in the backdrop for our levels. The Western-styled opening track being one of my personal favourites. We finish off the short train section, the orphans are saved, and with Dr. Porkchop swiftly defeated, we're introduced to Woody's Roundup. A more open area allowing you to explore a western town, completing different missions for people to earn gold, allowing you to buy more buildings and town folks, which in turn unlock more missions. The game is actually split into 2 games almost, the level-to-level story mode and then this more open explorative mode. So let's get back to the story for now, and we'll come back and talk about this a little bit later. Next up, as any good Toy Story game should include, we explore Andy's room. I think it's childhood nostalgia, but I just love being able to look around Andy's room in 3D. And you can tell they've put a lot of time and effort into the design to enable some small platforming sections without messing with the layout too much. They managed it really well. We're introduced to a few more moves here, wall jumps and special moves that only certain characters can do. Woody can use his lasso to swing from certain points, Jessie can land on certain objects around the environment, and Buzz is able to throw a character to reach areas you can't get to otherwise. Luckily, you can switch to whatever character you need with the click of a button, so this never gets in the way or slows the game's pace at all by needing you to go to a certain area to swap characters or go through a menu system. We explore the room a little more and pick up any collectibles we can get our hands on, these consisting of a few different cards in each level, including one special card and some townspeople. You get most of these while exploring naturally, and anything you do miss can be cleaned up with the level select. The levels are never obnoxiously long either, so it won't be frustrating for those who want that 100%. After we're finished in Andy's room, we make our way through the house looking for Rex, ending up in the basement needing to get our hands on a phone. We throw around a few little green army men, parachuting our way to our goal. Super simple, but a fun little shift in gameplay. They do a really good job of introducing different gameplay styles and then moving on before they become tedious. It really does give each level a nice flow, switching things up enough to keep it interesting, but never overstaying its welcome. Each level loosely follows a plot point in the film. You're obviously not getting to play through every event, but I think the parts they decided to translate to gameplay sections work really well, switching up gameplay styles with every level to keep it engaging, and keeping you eager to find out what you're going to be getting up to next. It is a little awkward in terms of how they explain why you are where you are, with Ham retelling the stories to Bonnie's toys before you get to jump in. It's almost more of a level select than a level to level story mode, if that makes sense, but I think it benefits the levels not having the restrictions that would be there if they were trying to more closely follow the film's plot. I mean, come on, it's Toy Story, we already know the story anyway. The story and the gameplay itself is just kinda loose, but it works perfectly here. They just kinda let you get on with it. You have your main objective, but if you want to explore, you can, and you're rewarded for it. You're playing as toys, so the fact that you can use your imagination a little and play how you want is perfectly fitting and creates a really fun but relaxed experience. Most of the time at least. The second level is a childhood dream of mine. Do you remember the opening of Toy Story 2 with the Buzz Lightyear video game? I was absolutely dying to play this game when I was young. It was this and a Red Hot Chili Peppers music video, weirdly enough. I just always wanted to be able to play through them myself. It took 14 years, but that dream finally became a reality. We get to play as Buzz, but in the video game, meaning all of his abilities are fully functional for a change. First, flying through an asteroid field, then landing on Zurg's home planet, using our laser to dispatch some enemies and getting through a few simple platforming sections. Again, this level switches genres on the regular, going from a 3D platformer to a third-person shooter to a top-down simple puzzler. We even get the colour falling floor section that I found oh so satisfying as a kid. It seems like it could be a headache switching styles and trying to get to grips with the controls for every change, but they handled this so well with a simple control layout that makes sense and will feel natural to anyone that's played a game in those genres before, or super simple to learn for those who haven't. The whole time I played through this game, I just imagined how I would have felt as a kid, and then that feeling just kind of rubbed off on me, sending me back to being sat on my bedroom floor with a big box of toys imagining these awesome worlds I could explore, and I really wasn't expecting that from a movie tie-in. The game isn't a long one. I managed to get through the story in about 3 hours while trying to grab as many of the collectibles that I could, but it would still be redundant for me to literally walk you through every level. Just so you get an idea though, we have a level in Sunny Daycare that acts as a selection of minigames, racing around on Bullseye and mini toy cars, and then seeing off a few dozen aliens in a first-person shooter. This one did go on a little bit too long, but still, it's fun. We have a level needing to save some of our friends from going through an incinerator, obviously themed around one of the most traumatic sequences in movie history, still accounting for about 38% of my insomnia. This level acts as a puzzle-based side-scroller, switching between the 3 characters to open up routes for the others to progress further. We have a stealth section, hiding from Lotso's patrol and saving our captured buddies, a level which is Bonnie just playing with her toys, creating a rising wave of coffee for Woody to platform away from, before exploding into a series of Ratchet & Clank-styled rail grinding through space. It feels like I'm playing through this girl's imagination, and it makes you share in that excitement. Our final level is a Bonnie playtime again, this one having you shoot your way through waves of evil muffins and then using a friggin' cow launcher to see off Dolly. It's just all a fun experience. Yeah, it does have a few issues. For me, the biggest issue being depth perception, falling off ledges and not grabbing legends you 100% should have grabbed. In the grand scheme of things though, it just completely hits on the point of pure imaginative fun. And at the end of the day, I think a tie-in game based on toys that have come to life before going on crazy adventures should be exactly that. Fun. If you were a fan of the films growing up, I definitely recommend you giving this one a go. Sit back on a lazy afternoon and just enjoy a little bit of that good old warm nostalgia. I mentioned the second section of this game earlier, so let's take a look at Woody's Roundup. As I said, it's a more explorative, small open world that has you building up your own western town, earning gold through completing missions to buy new toys, vehicles, buildings and townfolk, all of them being customizable with the collectibles you find all around this world. Different parts for buildings like paints, patterns, windows and outdoor decorations, new outfits, hats and hairstyles for every person in your town, and even vehicle skins. The missions are mostly all pretty straightforward and quick to complete, which sucks you into this loop of doing a few of them in a row to earn enough gold to get that new shiny toy you've had your eye on, which then comes with its own set of missions for you to complete. They can be as simple as taking someone for a haircut, putting a few cows back into their pen, or just grabbing a few items that somebody needs. You'll see these different lock gates around the world that need something from the shop for you to go through. Buying Bullseye will unlock his checkpoint races around different areas of the world, the toy car unlocking the skate parks for you to drive, flip and spin your way through, and then some toys come with full missions in their respective areas like dragon riding through this magical tree in Lotso's sickeningly sweet world, or ghostbusting your way through a haunted mansion with Sid's house. These toys acting as areas for you to explore with their own collectibles snuck into every corner. There's just something to keep you active at all times, and much like the story mode, it really is exciting to see what you're going to unlock next. It creates a really rewarding progression system and an actual reason to spend time exploring. You're not just collecting things for the sake of it, you've always got that next toy in mind to work towards. Or sometimes you just want to see what wacky hairstyle you can grab for one of your town folks. The fact that the collectibles work as customization items really makes the town feel like your own. It's not just a pointless grind for no reason, it actually feels like you're being rewarded for your efforts, and makes it feel like you're really building this town up from scratch, making it the way you want it. Exactly how you would if this was a real toy box. A lot of the other items are also themed around other Pixar properties, Finding Nemo paint, The Incredibles hair, or just an actual WALL-E character model. The fact that they've added in other franchises just really cements that feeling of tipping your toy box on the floor, grabbing your favourites no matter what they are or where they're from, and creating your old world with them, getting lost in your imagination. If you couldn't tell already, yeah, I really like this one. There's still a lot of stuff I haven't touched on in Woody's Roundup just because I was limited on time to get this video done, but I'll definitely be finishing this one off in my own time, and maybe you should go and explore it for yourself too. Yeah, it does have some flaws, and I don't think it's this incredible game with amazing mechanics or anything, but for a tie-in game to a Toy Story film, I think it's just about everything that it needed to be. It's a real shame I didn't get to play this at the perfect age because I know I would have lost my shit over this one, and would have spent countless hours making sure to explore every inch of this world we're given. But even as a 28-year-old, I recommend you grabbing a copy for a few easygoing, straightforward hours of fun. So Woody's Western got me in the mood for a little more cowboy action, but I'm not gonna lie to you, this film is fucking weird. It really took me off guard at the time because I was expecting your usual run-of-the-mill big-eyed cartoony romp, but instead got a way more mature, dark, and honestly a more thought-provoking story than I expected. There's something really captivating about the film, its characters, locations, and its animations. There's a rough grittiness that settles on everything, with each character model wearing little tokens of their backstories, and an almost uncomfortable hyper-realism about everything. There's also a lot of metaphors and adult jokes and themes sprinkled in too. I am classing it as a kids movie for the sake of this video, but I really think you'll only truly understand a lot of the film's messaging when watching it as an adult. The film follows Rango, a pet chameleon with dreams of being an actor, who unfortunately gets thrown from his owner's car during an accident, before then having to make his way to the old-timey, dry-as-fuck town of dirt. Rango soon becomes acting deputy of this town using a combination of his theatre skills and his desire to finally stand up from the crowd and stop blending in, because, you know, he's a chameleon. It's one of those metaphor things I was telling you about. There's a lizard, he's a cowboy, there's a water crisis, there's some beans in there somewhere. Even if I did take the time to explain it a little bit more coherently, I wouldn't be able to do it justice anyway, and I really think it's one of those films you just need to experience, insane surrealism and epic battle scenes included. The film released in 2011, so the movie tie-in game was on the decline at this point, and out of all the films I could think to adapt into a game, this really wouldn't be top of the list. But a series of unfortunate events was in a similar boat, and I enjoyed my time with it, so I'm keeping an open mind here. Approaching the plot in a similar way to Toy Story 3, the levels are based around Rango's retelling of events, which may or may not always be super credible. He's already our spur-sporting, law-enforcing lizard at the start of the game, so the plot doesn't follow the same as the films. Instead, we're thrown into an alien conspiracy, with the game opening with a meteor crashing into Earth, scattering fragments of itself all over. Beans' father goes to investigate the ruckus before getting himself beamed up in a green light, then flashing us forward 15 years into the future where the game then takes place. This means it's up to us to find these mysterious fragments, figure out where they came from and what they're for, and possibly even find out what happened to Beans' old man all those years ago. There's a few small cutscenes between levels to piece together a small plot, but you're really not getting a sprawling in-depth story here. More of an excuse for the levels to exist than a reason. We do get 9 levels in total, some of them being what you would expect, like shooting your way through western landscapes and battling Bad Bill on a runaway train, and then some less expected ones, like bouncing a few golf balls off of zombies' heads, pondering our own morality while riding on the back of a floating fish, or slaying hordes of an unusual alien race aboard their spaceship. Yep, this game gets just about as weird as the film, trust me. The main bulk of gameplay we get is a western-styled third-person shooter, dealing with multiple waves of enemies, breaking up the combat with smaller sections of platforming, stealth, rail grinding, bird riding, and golf. Like most of the games we've taken a look at today, the combat is pretty simplistic when we boil it down, but dare I say, it actually feels really good to play. The controls are tight and responsive, and there's this sort of chaotic energy to a lot of the combat encounters, making them super fast-paced and actually a lot of fun. We mainly fight basic enemies, but we do get some types mixed in there that require a little more thought. These dudes will chuck dynamite onto the field, these others launching into the air before crashing down to deal huge damage, briefly stunning themselves to allow you to pop a few shots at them, and then these huge chargers that lunge at you dealing damage to anything in their path. I'm not saying it's super in depth, but the different enemies mix things up just enough to avoid the boring wave after wave of basic 3-hit enemies. Yes, Bolt, I'm looking at you. Again. We only get to use one weapon throughout most of our time with the game, along with a ground pound styled move that is handy to knock enemies back when you're a little swamped, and then a tongue attack that we're able to charge up to increase its power. But I don't think I used this move even once. With the gun and ground pound being so much quicker and with more range, I just never found myself needing to use it. There's also 3 weapons we have access to briefly in the form of time limited pickups we find around each stage, usually whenever there's going to be a good amount of enemies to deal with. Our main weapon has unlimited ammo, with the only restriction being a brief cooldown between reloads. This helps keep the fast-paced combat they were aiming for, while avoiding needing to manage ammo or searching frantically around the level for it when we're running low. We also get the ability to upgrade the reload speed with thousands of the sheriff stars we collect in each level, which basically turns this thing into a frantic firing minigun as soon as you've upgraded it enough. You can also upgrade Rango's health, damage dealt, amount of stars collected for defeating enemies, and the length of time we get to use the special weapons for, among a few other things. I fully believe you could get through this game without a single upgrade, but it is nice to have a reason to bother picking up the stars and have a little goal to work towards at least. At first, I was a little disappointed to see that there's an auto-aim feature that constantly targets the nearest enemy, meaning you're left to just spam the fire button. But I actually think it benefits the combat here. The screen can get pretty packed with enemies, so the auto-aim allows you to focus more so on movement and swift dodge rolling out of harm's way, while still being able to deal damage. We do have the option to hold the left trigger, pulling the camera into a super close over-the-shoulder view, which I did try to use as much as possible, but with how busy some of the encounters do get, I just ended up falling back on the auto-aim feature a lot. While we're talking about how much can happen on screen, the performance can absolutely tank at certain points. Again, I am playing the PS3 version, and I know a lot of games during this generation struggled with performance on their PlayStation ports, but this one in particular is pretty bad. It mainly happens when you have a bunch of enemies on screen, so the auto-aim spray and pray did save the performance from becoming a bit frustrating, but the hit to frame rate is super noticeable throughout a lot of the game. Visually though, Rango is pretty great for his time. The developers actually had access to the movie assets, meaning all the characters are as close as they could be, which lends an authenticity to the game. Obviously there's nowhere near as much detail as you do get in the film, but we have a bunch of recognisable characters with the same little quirks and details, and some really cool environments to make our way through. I especially love the little touches like real world objects reminding us that we're just this tiny little lizard dude. Considering a lot of the environments are super samey, they did try to give each of the levels a separate visual style. We have deserty desert, windy desert, snowy desert, industrial desert, and Daztec video game arcade cabinet. Yeah, the last quarter of this game really takes a turn.
You know what you have to do.
As I mentioned earlier, we get a few other gameplay styles. Some platforming and wall climbing, which unfortunately remain incredibly simple. The levels are super linear, so it doesn't leave any room for us to go exploring on our own or mastering any more difficult platforming challenges for secrets or unlocks. Despite the lack of challenge though, these sections control well and serve their purpose of basically filling the gaps between combat encounters. We also have a few animal riding sections which again control really well and are super fast paced with that same chaotic energy as the combat. I think these sections were probably my favourite, leaving us to take out some bandits, aback a bird or a bat, jumping over obstacles, blowing up barriers and avoiding fallen cactus. Or cactuses. Cacti? The only time I really didn't like this style of gameplay was during the UFO driving section in our last level. I just found the visuals a little difficult to make sense of with all the weird level design, which meant a lot of banging into walls and a little bit of a headache. It is pretty brief though, so not really an issue. There's also two mini games we get in most levels. You'll see this bullet icon throughout the game, which enters us into a short section of guiding a bullet to a few different targets, which will then have a knock-on effect to something in the environment, opening up a route or distracting this monstrous face so we can sneak past. The second of these mini games being a super short round of golf, adjusting your aim, setting your power, and then guiding our little bug ball to its target. I think this variety really helps the overall experience of Rango, and they manage the time you spend with each gameplay style really well. The combat could have easily become repetitive, so you have some platforming to do in between. But that is super simple, so it could become boring quite quickly. So let's throw you into some animal riding to mix it up a little. But you know, that is going to lose its thrill eventually. So let's do some traditional side-scrolling, or some rail grinding, or why not a boss battle with Rattlesnake Jake himself. Each element individually is very simple with the potential to become tedious, but blending all of them together actually creates a really fun experience. I'm not sure if I've set my expectations a little lower going into this one due to a few of the other games we've looked at today, but I do really like the Rango game. It's good looking, well controlling, weird as fuck, and most importantly, a fun few hours. Ironically, that was my Tinder bio for a while. My biggest criticism coming in that previous sentence too though. A few hours. Yeah, this game is incredibly short. It took me just over 3 hours while trying my best to explore any little side paths I could. There are only two forms of collectibles, fish bowls and mining spots, but they do only unlock concept art and some costumes for Rango, so unless you're really into that type of thing, there isn't a lot of replayability here. I'm kind of torn with the length of it to be honest. It is fun while it lasted, but would extending it with more of the same create that repetitiveness that they've managed to avoid? It would have been awesome to see a hub world with some little side objectives and secrets for us to find. They could have added races with the fun riding mechanics made, maybe they could have even deepened the platforming a little with more branching paths, or even give us a more open level needing us to explore an area for collectibles to trade for one of the meteor fragments, similar to what they do with Ratchet & Clank. It just really would have been nice to get another 2 hours out of this game. We have to settle with what we're given though, and personally I'm not too bothered about how brief it is, because the game's a decade old and I grabbed my copy off of eBay for £8. But I can't imagine it would have been disappointing for a kid to rip this open on his birthday, only for the surprisingly fun experience to be such a short one. With that said, I'm happy to say that I've actually been pleasantly surprised with a few of the games that we've taken a look at today. There's nothing groundbreaking here, but there is just some simple, straightforward, easygoing fun, which I would say is the main selling point when you're basing your game off a popular kids movie. Yes, there have been some misses along with some unfulfilled potential, mainly caused by lazy design or a noticeably rushed product, but I can see why kids would have really enjoyed extending the times with the characters from some of their favourite films with these games. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I do get why they don't make these games anymore. But I do think it's a real shame we don't get the experience of exploring some of our favourite on-screen worlds at our own pace anymore. Some of my favourite stories and characters come from just video game properties, but you can't honestly tell me that Raya wouldn't have made a sick game.
The path of a spirit guide is a lonely one.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So, what do you think? Are you glad to see the wave of movie tie-ins finally broke, letting us move on to bigger and better things? Or do you miss the ability to stay in these worlds for just a little bit longer?
Let me know some of the movie tie-in games you remember really enjoying growing up, and if enough people end up liking this video,
maybe I'll jump in and take a look at a few of your favourites in future. I really hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble about completely irrelevant games for the last 50 minutes, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with videos from me in the future, and I really hope to see all you guys in the next video.